Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Delusions of Grandeur. I am your not so usual host, Septum Sim. But of course, today is another day on our Meet the Cast month, and we're going to go forward with Forrest's picks this time. And I will hand it over to you, Forrest. What do we got this week?
Thank you, Brandon. This week we got 1995's Mallrats, Kevin Smith's second movie, uh, about two young slackers who both of them get dumped by Brody and T.S. who get dumped by their girlfriends. So they go to the mall. They go to the mall. They go to the mall to basically go to the mall and hang out to console themselves, or I guess is the word.
The movie is basically Bros Before Hoes. Back when people said
that, yeah, exactly.
That's all you need.
They go to the mall. They go to this mall. They go to the mall and we see the hijinks ensue throughout their day at the mall.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
and Stanley is there.
Yep, Stanley is there. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a bit. But first, let's go around and do first impressions. Brandon, is this your first time seeing Mallrats?
Oh no! This is actually my favorite Kevin Smith film.
Oh wow!
I first got introduced to it. I want to say it might even have been the first Kevin Smith film. Well, second, because I got Clerks first. Everybody sees Clerks eventually, one way or the other.
I didn't.
But I ended up seeing Clerks first, then Mallrats, then Dogma. So it's an odd order there. And I didn't even understand Kevin Smith at the time when I was looking at it. I really never thought about Kevin Smith as a person until Mallrats. I mean, not Mallrats. Sorry, until Dogma. But I love that film because, that was that type of 90s culture, mall culture, usually 80s, 90s, and maybe even early 2000s mall culture. That was what I grew up with. And I just love that. The geek culture, stuff like that. It could be, while I do think that it could be done today, I do not think that it would have the same meaning today as it would back then. And because of that, it's just, to me, excellent film. Can watch it over and over again. And when I got the opportunity to pick it up on Arrow, well, yes, please. Exactly.
Oh, nice. Wow, I'm jealous. I just have the regular DVD.
Now, out of curiosity, which version did we all watch? Because I watched
the theatrical.
I watched the extended, but that's
me too. I watched the director's cut, which it's so what's interesting is that there was a lot that was cut out of the film, which was restored with the extended cut, particularly the way it opens. It kind of explains more of why the conflict gets set into motion in the way that it does. It's a bit edgier, the opening is of the extended cut. But I think I figured, if I'm going to watch this, I'm going to watch what the director intended for me. And this Arrow version also includes the kind of butchered, it has the theatrical cut, it's got the extended, director's cut, and then it's also got the butchered TV edits with the horrible dubbing for Jay and that kind of stuff, cutting out all the swearing and stuff, which is unreal.
I need to rewatch that now that I have it. I haven't seen it since it was on TV.
Well, you were talking before we went live about limited time, and it's like I'd love to really do a deep dive in that set, but all I had time for was to watch I did watch the commentary track as well, which was good. It was mostly the bunch of them sitting around cutting up, having a good time.
That's pretty much almost all his commentaries.
Right.
When he's got multiple
Big,
people, except for Tusk was actually one of his best commentary tracks, which also, in my opinion, is one of his best movies. I know some people love it, some people hate it, but like that was actually one of his best commentary tracks because you actually kind of get to know what it was like to make the film, which is what a commentary track's supposed to be. Because the other ones are them kind of bullshitting, which is fine, because that's partially what you come to a Kevin Smith film for. But
right.
And watch us talk about Tusk. You can look it up. I believe it's
Indeed.
on Inside Movies
And
Galore.
Clerks
so
as
check it out.
well.
Yeah.
We did a couple of them. How about Brandon? Did you do your full
Yep.
thing?
Yep.
Okay,
Pretty
cool.
much. Yep.
All right. I guess. Why don't we just? I'm sorry, my brain just crapped out. It's been a long
Why
day.
don't you go since you're talking with us
Yes,
right
yes.
now?
There we go. That's
Time
what I
off
was
more.
meaning. Oh, geez. Okay.
Geez.
Oh, geez. Actually, that was one of the cool trivia I read about this. They filmed this. They were literally filming down the road from Fargo, apparently.
Wow.
So that
a date with Destiny. How about that?
Well, and Dane, this will make you even happier. Apparently, Aliens was being filmed in the lot next to the one filming Full Metal Jacket. So
that's correct.
Yes.
Well, just like how Raiders of the Lost Ark moved into the same sound stages that used to occupy the Shining sets. Spielberg got in there just as Kubrick was wrapping up.
Oh, nice. He probably had to wait a while, though.
Yes, he did. Although the filming for that wasn't nearly as long as, say, Eyes Wide Shut. But yeah.
I'm going to try and remember some of those points when we do Aliens. But in sharp contrast to what Brandon just said, Clerks was not my first introduction to Kevin Smith. As a matter of fact, I think I had heard rumblings about him at work. Like, I think I'd heard people talking about Clerks and Mallrats and just never really did much with it. But then my first semester at Rana, it was Dogma's release, and the group that I fell in with were definitely Kevin Smith fans, and so we all went as a group to see Dogma, and that was definitely my first Kevin Smith movie. But I do think I probably went back home and went to work and said, "Hey, I saw this movie," and then they probably, because I know that there was one coworker in particular who made a mission that I would see Clerks and Mallrats. Like, he was very adamant that I needed to see these movies, and I think it was Dogma that triggered me finally doing that.
Yeah.
I could not say for sure. Nor could I say for sure, hey, Roger.
Hey, Roger.
I could not remotely say for sure how many times I've seen Mallrats. It's been a few. I've seen it a few times over the years. It's been a couple of years, but the Arrow release was a great excuse to upgrade because I had the old DVD kind of. I love the cover on the DVD, but I kind of like the Arrow cover too. It's kind of hard to say which one I like better, I like that old school comic cover that they always had, though. It was really cool.
Designed by Drew Struzan.
Right.
Oh yeah. It would be a contender for that best artwork nominee that we put up.
I'm also going to differ from Brandon slightly in that Mallrats has never been my favorite Kevin Smith movie, but I've always enjoyed it. Like, it's good, and I agree. Like that, I grew up in the mall era, so I'm well aware of that. Well, you could say lifestyle. And there's a bit of nostalgia to it, definitely.
Lifestyles of the wayward and angsty.
Exactly.
I'm aware I'm in the minority.
Actually, no. Okay, I would say lifestyles of the broken shiftless.
That too.
But it's a fun movie. It's got some good moments in it. It's got some of the. The Stanley cameo is quite enjoyable, and some of the others, like I had totally forgotten Svenning was played by Michael Rooker, And it's just going back after seeing all the other stuff I've seen him in, going back and seeing it, I'm like, that's pretty fun. But it's good times. I do hope I get a chance to watch those other cuts, though. It'd be nice.
Okay, thank you. Very good, Jake. Dane, this is your first time seeing Mallrats.
Mm-hmm.
No. Well, now I did get the Arrow not too long ago, and I did watch I just started with the extended cut because I was like, this is what he wrote, this is what he filmed, this is what he intended. So, I'm going to dive into that. And I was doing it kind of during, it was like the fall or winter fall of 2020 leading into early 2021. I was getting through all of Kevin Smith, all of his films because I was, it was a really, really hard time in my life at the time. And so I was like, I need to laugh, but I also want to see how this person did it. And this one, it was just shy of the top 5. It definitely ranked up there pretty good for me. I was surprised because this film was not well received commercially or critically at the time. It was actually kind of a disaster, and they were out of theaters in like a week because they did such poor numbers. And then it became quite the hit on home video. And then of course by the time we got to like around 2005, like 10 years later, it had become quite the cult classic. And then nowadays it has been such a cult classic that it got the Arrow treatment, which is really awesome. And yeah, it definitely is a favorite of mine because I like the comic book culture of the 90s. I like the fact that the teenagers are into that sort of thing. I like the fact that the major difference between Mallrats and Clerks, I think, is that it's a slacker bromances back before that was a thing. But what I like about this one in particular is that I feel like the two leads, that they are allowed to be really smart and intelligent, in they're like the vocabulary level of our protagonist is much elevated relative to what it was in Clerks and relative to what it is in other ones, which is not to say that the other films, they, because they tend to speak wittily in very crude ways, which they do here as well. But it's just, if you ever listen to the two back to back, you notice that the two lead characters here are very intelligent. I like that they're allowed to be intelligent. Perhaps that's part of the reason why it didn't do so well. But what I like about that is that it provides a bit more of a contrast between our heroes versus the way that the adults speak versus the way that Jay and Silent Bob speak. And that's what I loved about Dogma too, is the ways in which the different characters spoke. They all had their own voices and they had their own like kind of more elevated ways of speaking and more lowbrow ways of speaking. And it was very Shakespearean, because Shakespeare did that as well. The kings and queens would speak in a very specific way, and then the comic relief, peasants and bums would speak in a very specific way.
Yeah, I couldn't really see Alan Rickman delivering Jay's lines.
I want to hear him do the song at the beginning of Strike Back.
Oh yeah. Well, but as far as my exposure to Kevin Smith, my first exposure to him was actually Dogma, and that was back in college. And I knew people that were into Kevin Smith, definitely. Perhaps the fandom wasn't nearly as pronounced as it would have been in the 90s and 2000s. But I knew plenty of people that were into him. That was around the time of Red State, which a lot of the media and the fandom were sort of saying, oh, it's his career implosion. He's done, like that was around that time. But
I liked Red State.
I did too. I think it was imperfect, but I think it was a bold move for him. But it was around that time when I was getting first exposed to his stuff, and I saw when I was in college, I saw that, and I saw Chasing Amy and Clerks, all of which I really enjoyed. And I was surprised that it took me this long to see Mallrats, because it was always kind of held up in similar esteem to like his earlier successes. Again, it's not really trying to be deep or meaningful or anything necessarily, but I think as far as just pure comedy, I think it's one of his strongest ones, partially because just how the characters are allowed to be intelligent. In a way, I know that he's a big John Hughes fan, which is not surprising. Who isn't? But like this to me felt like an alternate universe movie in which, like a movie from an alternate timeline in which Home Alone never happened, and John Hughes kept making the teen movies well into the 90s, and this is like the 90s version of what a John Hughes film would be like. It has a lot in.
I mean, I think he described this movie. Kevin Smith did describe this movie. He intended it to be a smart Porky's. That's what he said.
I think
it has some stuff in common with that, but I think also with like, you could totally see these kids existing alongside like Ferris Bueller and his friends, or like Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles, stuff like that.
Now, am I remembering correctly that in Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob were on a pilgrimage to
Sherburne, Illinois?
Yes, yeah.
You know that guy too. We're going to Sherburne, Illinois, because all the honeys are top shelf, but all the big guys are whiny pussies. so we took somebody we rode and caught a bus. You know what we found out? There ain't no Sherburne, Illinois. Movies are fucking bullshit.
We'll have to cover that one eventually.
That's my favorite Kevin Smith film by far. But I'll say with this film, it has my favorite look out of all the Jay and Silent Bob costumes. It has my favorite costumes, because this is when they turned to the dark side and they got their black costumes.
You got the Sith Silent Bob there.
Exactly.
Jedi mind trick.
And not to, and you can tell that the movie was made when it was. So it was like mid 90s, kind of angsty teens, but you definitely couldn't have gotten away with that wardrobe from like April 1999 onward, because it does look a little Columbine-ish. But obviously this was years before, so But as far as the View Askew movies, the View Askew universe, this one actually takes place at the beginning, because not counting that brief little bit with Jay and Silent Bob as kids in Strikes Back, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Not counting that, this actually takes place at the beginning of the timeline, because it takes place one day before Clerks does, so it's technically a prequel.
Yeah, it was kind of ahead of the game in terms of being a prequel, and also the shared cinematic universe.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The way that they were able to do that was Kevin Smith Kevin Smith always likes to downplay himself as like, oh, I'm just a goofy fat guy and a goofy stoner, blah blah blah. But he's done a lot of really, really smart business decisions. One of which was in the initial deal for Clerks, he said that no matter what, regardless of what happens with Clerks and other stuff, that he and Scott Mosier own the characters of Silent Bob and Jay, and so that's how those characters were able to. Or sorry, he and Jason Mewes rather own the characters of Jay and Silent Bob. So no matter what happens, those characters are able to show up in whatever. And so that's partially they are the C-3PO and R2-D2, or the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of that universe. And so they are the glue that kind of helps to hold it together. And that's how they were able to go from Clerks, which is Miramax, to Mallrats, which is Universal, and then back to Miramax with Chasing Amy and that kind of stuff.
Not to mention that apparently Universal was pushing hard to replace Mewes with Seth Green. And that probably helped them push back against that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it was I've learned a lot of interesting behind the scenes information with this film because that was one of the things that they were really pushing for a star in that role. And as much as the two of those, Seth Breckenmeyer and Seth Green, as much as they wanted to work, they looked at Jay and they were like, "We can't do his part. He is this character, which he is. You know, he wrote him basically as Jay. You know, he wrote him into the film as he is." And they're like, "We don't want to take his part." And Universal was really pushing for a star part, and they basically said, "Yeah, you can house him up in Minnesota where they shot. You can you can film with him there, but we're not, you know, putting him up in a room or anything." So he had to share a room with Kevin Smith and had to kind of audition for his own part. And they also weren't sure if he was necessarily reliable, which, you know, that part I could understand because he was definitely into like
He had a
each
reputation.
in each movie, Kevin Smith was having to like get him sobered up enough to shoot and everything, and it became harder and harder to do. And but yeah, so I could understand the risk factor on Universal's part, but he did eventually, you know, win his own part back, and you know, got on Universal's payroll and that kind of stuff, which was good. But yeah, it's as far as first impressions, it definitely is one of my favorites, but it was just shy of the top 5. Although I could see this one definitely jockeys in position for the number 5 spot between that and Jersey Girl, which I actually like Jersey Girl quite a bit. Jersey Girl just barely beats it out because of like I think it's very underrated.
Okay. Right. And Roger, is this your first time seeing Mallrats? Roger?
Hello, you hear me?
Yes.
Actually, I did miss this particular movie. I just I've been very long here for the ride.
Okay, but have you seen Mallrats before?
No, that's the first time I even heard of it.
He's here to observe.
Here to observe and learn from my seniors.
Okay. Okay.
Well, hey, anybody that saw Captain Marvel, they paid it forward in that film because it takes place in 95, and they had the Stan Lee cameo there where Stan Lee's on the bus reading or you know, rehearsing his lines for the Mallrats script. So that was a good way to pay it forward. Right. And so that was a particularly neat way to tie them together. And Mallrats is not a Disney film or anything. That is Universal. So they did it just purely out of love.
Okay, Dave, is this your first time seeing Mallrats?
No, it is definitely not my first time seeing it. I'm sorry if my voice is like shit.
Dave is joining us from beyond the. Dave is joining us from beyond the grave, ladies and gentlemen.
I am now.
Oh, are you calling in from Quindecum?
I am calling in from the grave. Anyways, since many of you are doomed, anyways.
Yeah. I'll be visited by 3 spirits.
Right. Oh, and one of them is named Jay, one of them is named Silent Bob, and the other is, well, anyways.
Steve. TJ and actually one of them's TJ, one of them's Brody, and then Jay and Silent Bob come as a package deal.
Here we go. Yeah. Well, no, this is not my first time watching the film. This is my favorite Kevin Smith film besides Tusk. I get a kick out of the dark humor. It's not laugh out loud humor. Mm-hmm. To me, it's more like stoner comedy.
And this was before he was even a stoner.
Well,
it's kind of funny that you say dark humor because I think this is actually one of his lighter-hearted ones.
It's one of his more. It's probably one of his more commercially accessible.
And yet, get commercially accessed.
Probably one of the raunchier films that he has done.
That's
Oh, yeah.
true. That's true.
Except for Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. It's hard to get raunchier than that one, especially the unrated cut for that. Oh gosh.
But I enjoy the random humor and the craziness of Jay and Silent Bob and
The hijinks.
and the various patrons of the mall.
Mhm.
So I thoroughly and I remember going to the mall to just hang out. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, you could literally just go to the mall and be like, "Yo, I'm up here at the mall. You want to come meet me?" And then like 5 or 6 people would just roll up, and we'd be hitting Hot Topics or something like that, and then you know, we'd make a day of it. And so, and see, I grew up in when the malls you could actually still smoke in the malls. So to me, having the freedom to smoke, talk, hang, this was a thing. You know, this was the after school party. So to me, going to the mall was like something to look forward to. You know, so and eventually, you know, I learned how to mall hop. So, and that's kind of what they do. You know.
Which the mall hopping then turned into club hopping, which is why your voice sounds the way it does.
Actually, I was going to say, you know, you get it turn into like a mall crawl, which they kind of do in this movie, where they end up going to
to that other mall.
right.
Oh, a sailboat. I don't see that.
I
Wow,
feel
it's
sorry.
weird.
All the time.
I feel sorry for that guy. I
Bastard.
really do.
I love at the end where they tell what happens to everyone. Willem finally saw the sailboat. Yeah.
And that's at a time when Magic Eye was like really huge.
Yeah,
You know,
Oh yeah.
I remember
seeing it in the Sunday
Scholastic book
Funnies.
orders. I remember Scholastic book orders at school, and every time it was either Goosebumps or Magic Eye. You know,
Right.
So that was at a time when, you know, it was more artistic to have a Magic Eye book around the house, or an I Spy. You know.
Oh yeah. Such fun.
When you're a little too old for the Where's Waldo, you
You move on to.
Hey, I still get a kick out of Where's Waldo. I wanted a Where's Wilma.
When you've outgrown Where's Waldo, but you don't have access to hard drugs yet. And then when you do get access to hard drugs and you see the Magic Eye pictures, then it enhances the experience.
Okay, and that's when you start thinking that Dinotopia is both of them combined.
Okay.
Okay, and for me, no, it's definitely not my first time watching Mallrats. I'm definitely for me, Kevin Smith, my first one I saw was Dogma when I was like 12 years old. My dad rented it.
Oh shit!
But yeah, because my dad rented it because Salma Hayek was in it.
Always a good reason.
I cannot blame him there one iota.
And I think my dad would agree with him on that.
And,
He's also like, Daddy would like to watch this stripper scene alone if you don't mind.
where you can't even see a thing. But
he was probably
yeah.
heartbroken when he found out that she was missing certain items.
my dad actually said he preferred her scenes in Wild Wild West.
Well, that or From Dusk Till
Desperado.
Dawn.
I don't know if he'd seen that one, but at that time. But that's what I remember him telling me. But anyway,
she's still like an 11 out of 10 even today.
Yep.
Yeah.
But no, for me, this is not the first time watching. Dogma was the first one I saw, and then Clerks. I saw Clerks, which was for me is one of those movies that made me want to make movies.
Oh yeah.
Or made me realize that I didn't have to have $1 million to make a movie. Um, but then after that, after I saw Clerks, I decided to go in order. Watch all of his movies up to that point in order. So I saw and then actually these are in the months leading up to Jane Silent Bob Strike Back. So after Clerks, I saw this movie. I saw this movie, and definitely, I have to agree with Brandon. This movie definitely resonated with my teenage self. In terms of being and it captures the whole mall culture of that time perfectly. I was definitely a teen, maybe not so much TS, but Brody, like as far as being a basement dwelling comic book reading mall rat. Who really the only place, really the only things I would buy at the mall were comic books at the comic book shop or Barnes and Noble.
Right.
You gotta love the fact that the comic book store in the mall, it's that very kind of it's the 90s. It's a 90s comic shop that is like just after the speculator bubble.
It reminds me of like Empire Records.
Yeah. But but you gotta love the fact that the comic book store here, it's like just after the speculator boom and after the big crash, but it's also pre everything being all the movie and TV show spinoffs everywhere.
Right.
Because it's still the actual proper comic book versions of characters that are on display. Because that's what was what were the best things in the world for a comic book fan at that time. It was the comic books themselves, but you'd be thankful for a well received SNES game or a well received animated show like Batman the Animated Series or something like that. There were no multi-million-dollar tentpole films yet, except for maybe the occasional Batman film.
Well, I was going to say this was kind of the height of Batmania because you had the animated series. Batman Forever was just about to come out and kill it all, or just had, or start to kill it all.
Actually, I would refer to it more as the second wave of Batmania.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do want to mention, as far as you're talking about the individual stores, the one scene where you see Jay and Silent Bob in the bookstore, I swear that was just like the bookstore at my mall. So that one particularly felt really nostalgic because I was like, that is our bookstore.
Oh, I'm curious. Which bookstore? The Walden Books or the Dalton?
See, I can't remember that.
We always had the Walden Books where I was from.
Walden Books was in the malls, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other one was the Dalton or whatever.
Dalton.
What was it? Dalton Booksellers or whatever.
More low rent compared to Walden Books.
Right. But so there was that nice nostalgic piece. Plus, there's that funny thing. Wait, what are you guys doing at a bookstore? Last place they'd look for us.
Actually, it's kind of funny because Jake and I would have been familiar with the same malls, except it would have been the opposite. You'd have gotten to the Richmond ones before me, but I'd have gotten to the Roanoke ones before you.
True, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this movie definitely. I feel like it resonated with me. Like it encapsulated. It definitely spoke to teen. It's definitely a movie that spoke to teenage me, in terms of that lifestyle of comic books and hanging out at the mall, just hanging out at the mall, collecting comic books, video games, and hanging out, basement dwelling and hanging out at the mall. Plus also because I visited because it was set in New Jersey and. I visited New Jersey a lot growing up because I have a lot of family. I have or had a lot of family there. So there was another reason why it's really that it spoke that this movie spoke to me. And you have all these a lot of these characters you definitely do see in malls across America. Actually, it's funny you said, because Brent, you were talking about how this seemed more prevalent in back in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts. But I kind of feel like now that I feel like now mall rat cult, mall rats are probably more commonplace now than they were 25, 30 years ago. because nobody goes to the mall to shop anymore. Everybody's just there to hang out.
It
Well, that's the
depends on
thing
the
is
mall
it's
because malls are
yeah.
dying in a lot of places
Yeah.
for that reason. But I admit, like, if you've got an area where you have a thriving mall, yeah, it probably would be like that.
I mean, yeah,
And the
malls
closest
are
one to where I live, I think the thing that's keeping it afloat, in my opinion at least, is that they moved the Barnes and Noble into the mall,
Mhm.
and that is still a pretty busy location. But the mall itself is, it's a fraction of what it used to be.
Right.
Yeah.
I
yeah,
would say,
most malls are fashion parks these days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the only one that's I mean, that's the only traditional one. We have one that's extremely successful, but that's because it's a gimmicky mall. It's an outdoor mall, uh, and and is in a good area.
oh,
But
you're
yeah,
talking about Stony
it's
Point, yeah.
but I look at it as a different culture, a different mall culture than it was back then. It's similar but different. Sort of like geek culture is different but
yeah.
similar.
Mhm.
I mean, when I was a comic book nerd and reading my comics on the bus, I was treated very differently than somebody who would have been reading their superhero comics on the bus these days. So,
Right.
They probably saw you as like some dorky man child, right?
It'd be like,
well, as a, as a teenager, it
no.
was more of just like only kids read comic books, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And now
And
it's like that's all mainstream. So yeah.
yeah. And for
right.
me, I think for me, like back in high school, it was like it was kind of like around the time that Spider-Man and X-Men were taking off at the box office. So
Mhm.
I was kind of in that battleground. I guess it was for me. I guess for me that time in the early aughts was
Mhm.
probably like that, like kind of like a transitional period.
Yeah. I did my mall thing, back in like 2008, 2009, which was kind of a weird time because that was, in the midst of the recession and,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. But I also got to see, for Dave mentioned Hot Topic, I got to see the actual transition where Hot Topic was like this dark, dingy, creepy, like dungeon-like place,
Store.
which is what I loved
Right.
about it. And then they
Right.
switched locations in the mall, and it opened up a lot more. It became a lot brighter, and then eventually they changed their logo, and then it was like, well, it's not Hot Topic anymore, is it?
Yeah.
And I was because I
Well,
liked
it was
going.
cool.
I liked going there because it upset the
Mhm.
parents, and
Sure.
and that's why every kid that ever went to a Hot Topic, that's why you'd go, because it upsets your parents, and you feel like you're in a vampire's dungeon or a sex dungeon. Although that's more Spencer's gifts.
Yeah.
But you know,
Yeah, no,
like I
now
said,
now I feel like Hot Topic is indistinguishable from Hot Topic and Spencer's are indistinguishable from one another.
Pretty
well,
much.
Spencer's is just a lot more adult and a lot more like
Yeah.
overtly crude in the back part. It's
Yeah.
like they sell stuff that you're kind of shocked that they could sell at like a supposedly family friendly mall, but it's
And though it's been a
it's
while since I've been in either, I agree with Dane's description of the because Hot Topic is more open and Spencer's is more closed in
Oh,
and
yeah.
is like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
would feel more
but
claustrophobic. I feel
Spencer's though, it's like they have
Mhm.
like the novelty gifts, and they have novelty gifts, they have stoner stuff, and they have
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
like sexual slash gag, sexual gag gifts and
Mhm.
stuff that make it feel more like something you would get for like a frat party necessarily, versus like Hot
Right.
Topic in its glory days. It was meant to be like a dangerous looking place, like a place where you could go and feel all
Yeah.
edgy and creepy and stuff. And then partially, I think it's because the goth scene did sort of die out as
It went
teenagers.
from emo to pop punk.
It
yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Well, but it made me, disappointed because I liked going because it upset the parents, and
Mhm.
it made you feel all, dangerous and edgy and shit, and then
Mhm.
nowadays it's like whatever. It's just kind of a rigor. It's like their attempts to kind of
Right.
it's like the pop culture diarrhea store basically.
That's
Um,
the best way to put it.
Yeah. Well, that's
I-
what TS and Brody would call it. That's what Jay and
Right.
Silent Bob would probably call it. They strike me as.
I have a feeling
they
Brody would
strike-
have more colorful language, but
I'm
Yeah.
sure he would, but I think Jay and Silent Bob strike me as more Spencer's people.
Now, a question for those of you
Hmm?
who watched the theatrical cut recently,
right.
because my memory is it's been a while since I've watched it last. Um, if at the beginning of the cut I'm watching actually took place at the college, and you got to see the incident with the governor getting
Right.
shot at.
Yeah,
Did they
that's the
show that
extended
in the
cut.
theatrical?
That's not part of the
That's
theatrical. No.
extended.
The theatrical basically starts with TS showing up at Brandy's house to take her on the trip to Florida.
To Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
after
starts.
that, well, you have
that
that really
starts early.
badass opening scene with the comic covers, which is just
Yes.
like one of the great opening
Yeah.
sequences there.
And that's still in the extended
Right.
cut there, but yeah, from what you're saying, the theatrical cut starts a little later. The extended version, TS is dressed up for a play recital. I'm reading the description. Is dressed up for a play recital, holding a prop musket while speaking to Brandy. Subsequently, his musket gets caught in her hair before accidentally firing. TS is misinterpreted as a sniper attempting to assassinate the governor, whom Brandy's father, Jared, works for. TS finds himself surrounded by news reporters before finding refuge in Brody's mother's basement, where Brody eventually suggests they go to the mall and hide in plain sight. And so that's partially why that occurs, and also partially why, why the plot's set into motion, why Michael Rooker hates TS so much, things like that. And, I made the reference to Jay and Silent Bob have the all black. They look vaguely kind of Columbine-ish. And then you have that opening, which, again, that was 4 years before, to be fair. But it's also kind of, again, a type of humor that you probably couldn't do even from 99 onward, let alone today, where there's a lot of stuff in the film as a whole that you could never do today.
They labeled it a terrorist attack and actually even made a joke about terrorism. Like, well, it's like, why is he dressed like a revolutionary? It's like, you know how they are.
Yeah. Which I'll need to look up. So this was October 20th, 1990. Let me look up when the Oklahoma City bombing was.
That was 95.
That was 91.
No, that was 90. Okay, it was April 95, and then that movie came out in October 95. So that would have been relevant. But again, there was no accusations of being, too edgy, too far, all that stuff.
Right.
Okay, so since we talked about, actually, let's start. Since we mentioned, we mentioned, TS is about to go to Florida with his girlfriend Brandy. Let's start. Let's get into the plot. So, TS is about to head to Florida with Brandy when she tells him that the girl who was supposed to be on her father's game show had died the night before. Because of what TS had told her about the television camera adding pounds, and Brandy volunteers to go on her father's game show, Truth or Date.
Yeah.
And right away, you get a direct tie-in to Clerks because Julie Dwyer was the one who, as they say repeatedly throughout the universe, died mid-backstroke. And
and she gets again in Chasing Amy.
Yes, the young lady whose casket Randall desecrated in the first.
That's right. One of my favorite things about, especially like the early View Askew films, which got more overt in both Jay and Silent Bob movies because they had like explicitly tie things together. But like I'm thinking like Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy tied together very nicely with just some sly references to little events that if you're paying attention that you'll know that that's what they're talking about, but the casual audience doesn't have to know that, which is good. But like, because again, Mallrats technically takes place at the beginning of the Askewniverse timeline, because in Clerks, Jay and Silent Bob show up and they reference some crazy stuff that went down at the mall. So because it takes place the day before, so
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
also,
Go ahead.
Hmm?
no, I was gonna. Oh man, I just lost my train of thought. My train of thought. What was I gonna say? But anyway, so Brandy goes. So Brandy breaks up with Brody to dumps Brody to go do this game show while while Brody. Actually, no, I was going to mention Brody mentions his cousin Walter, who is also
Mhm.
Randall's cousin Walter.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that other connection right there. You know, Brody and Randall being cousins.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Brody gets dumped by his girlfriend Renee because Renee, Brody will not. Brody refuses. Brody is afraid to introduce Renee to his mother.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And he's playing Sega Genesis in his room there, and he's also got the Spider-Man poster that he has on his wall in that opening and in that scene where we first meet him. I had that same poster when I was a kid. Granted, I had a much smaller version of it, but I had that same poster, and I've looked for it on eBay, and I have not been able to find it.
Mm-hmm.
I think partially because it's kind of a collector's item now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, normally I wouldn't say this about a comic book nerd because I was a comic book nerd, but he is a loser, a total loser. I'm
I mean,
sorry.
that's what I was thinking about. Like Renee, because Renee mentions like about people who were actually making a difference in the world, and he's sitting in his underwear playing Sega Genesis.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what I like, it's funny because Brody, like the way that, which, big props to Jason Lee for doing such a good job in all the View Askew movies. He was still relatively green at the time. He was a former skateboarder who was retiring, even though he was in his early 20s, and he was like, yeah, I'm retiring, I want to do acting. And he showed just what a good actor he could be. He really makes this character who could be so unlikable, and he kind of is unlikable, but you also can understand he gives it something else he gives something else to it that makes us want to see how he changes and grows, because there's just something about, I think it's partially because he is witty, he's smarter than he has a right to be, and also smarter than his station in life would, he's smarter than his station in life would lead you to believe. But also you do see his growth throughout the film, and you also see his growth throughout the Askew universe, because he does get his own comic book store, Brody's Secret Stash, and he does
the Tonight Show. He gets to host the Tonight Show.
Yeah,
Right.
and he does you do get to see him embrace a little bit more responsibility while also doing what he loves, which is really great. I like that kind of evolution for that kind of character. It's where they get to embrace adult responsibilities, but they do so while still being in the world that they love. And so I think that's what I like about his journey, and I like that about these characters in particular. It's not like it's another reason why I tend to like these two characters a little bit more than the Clerks duo, because Clerks is all about feeling stuck in your life and not really having much of a pathway to get out. You're trying to, but also not being all that great at it. And that's partially what Clerks 2 is about, is them kind of, it has that ambiguous ending of like they seem like they've progressed in life because they own the Quick Stop, but then it's like, oh wait, we're still just we're still at the Quick Stop. So it kind of has an ambiguous ending there. Whereas here you do feel like these kids, they have more of a future than they necessarily know. It's just they're going through kind of a tough time in their lives, and eventually they do get to that place of trying to embrace adult responsibilities while still doing what they love. Although I am kind of disappointed. I guess that Kevin Smith and Jack London, who plays TS, I guess that they Jeremy London, excuse me. I think that they, not to say that they didn't get along, but it was such that they didn't get along well enough for him to be in any more of them.
my understanding, partly from watching they talked about this. They didn't name names, but they made pretty clear in the commentary who they were talking about. They said there was one actor who just could not get their lines, that just kept dropping lines, that was stoned a lot, and the strong implication was that it was him. And I've read trivia since then that kind of confirmed that apparently, whatever issues they had keeping Muse sober, and they also had issues with Stan Lee not being able to learn his lines. They were willing to forgive, but I think with London, it was a little more difficult. I think,
Yeah,
especially because he was supposed to be the star of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's tough because Stan Lee, he wasn't like I personally would argue that he was a household name, just nowhere near to the degree that he eventually became.
Yeah.
But because I knew who he was from the time I was like a teeny tiny kid. So I would argue that his celebrity was still pretty strongly enforced, but again, it wasn't nearly to the degree that it would be in the pre-MCU Marvel movies, let alone the MCU.
And that's another area where Kevin Smith was kind of ahead of the curve, was Stan Lee cameos.
Actually, that's one thing.
But he was there before.
Well, that's one thing I did want to mention as far as the background of this. When we were kind of talking before, again, this was the time where I was kind of really getting into comics, and yes, I was a Marvel kid. I liked Batman, but I mostly was into X-Men and Spider-Man. And I remember doing projects in middle school where we were looking at the stock market and whatever. And that's where I first became aware of a little thing that was very important in the 90s. DC was soaring high, mostly because of Batman. They were raking in the dough. Marvel was bankrupt.
Yes,
Marvel had a horrible, horrible track record at the movies. They basically had
they didn't have much of a track record at all.
And a couple of Captain America movies that and then that Roger Corman movie that was never going to get released. And
Punisher, which is also
Punisher.
Right. They had very little going on in the mid 90s. Their comics were doing decently, but they weren't like
what hurt them though, and what hurt the industry in general, but what hurt them particularly was the speculators boom in the early 90s because of the comic books like Action Comics #1 and different stuff like that. They were going for big auctions, and so speculators were like, "Ooh, if we invest in this now, then these items will be collector's items."
I was one of them. I'll admit.
They had the huge kind of obscene multiple variant covers, and they had all the gimmick stuff, and then they had huge print runs that they couldn't eventually justify, and so then that's what led to the big crash. And Marvel
the entryway for me, it was cards. Actually, I got into cards before comics, but the first issue that I ever read was I think it was Uncanny X-Men 304, which was the one immediately prior to the Fatal Attraction storyline. And the Fatal Attraction storyline was one of those with the glossy covers that had the holograph card embedded in the cover. And I still, to my mind, I still think that would make a damn good movie if they would turn that story into a movie, but or a couple of them. But my point being that one of the reasons why this movie heavily features Marvel, and there's also a fair bit of Image. Like I love the Gwen 13 in the opening credits. I thought that was great. But it heavily features Marvel with very little DC. And I have a feeling that they probably could afford Marvel when this movie was made.
Well, I think partially it was that, but also you mentioned Image. So during Image's launch, they actually did eclipse DC for a time in terms of sales because of Spawn, but also because the massive creative pool, creative teams at Marvel, they left and They did. This is like
Mhm.
the ultimate '90s troll move. Before trolling was even a thing in the internet world, but like
Mhm.
they trolled the shit out of Marvel and DC because
Yeah.
the Image founders, they set up meetings with the higher ups at both Marvel and DC kind of on separate days, and we're like, yeah, we're not working for you. And they did Marvel first, and then they did DC right after because DC thought, oh, we're gonna get all of these people, we're going to get blessed by this massive wave of talent. They're like, yeah, we're not going to work for you either. So it's like, man, they were trolling before before trolling was a thing. But yeah, but I think that's very of its time and very of the period that they managed to capture well. And let's not forget that soon after this, Kevin Smith himself would make some impressions on the comic book world
Right.
with it
Oh, yeah.
Image, or I think it was with Image initially, because of he did Chasing Dogma, which was set in between Chasing Amy and Dogma.
Yep.
And he's done a couple other comic book series that are in the View Askew universe, let alone his, work for Marvel, work for DC, all that stuff. So
Green Arrow story is amazing.
Yeah, I read some Green Arrow that he wrote. Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, he had a good run. Green. I would say, yeah, I really liked his runs on Green Arrow and Daredevil.
Yeah.
But that's
I would definitely love to dive into his bibliography. Something I noticed with Dogma, and I kind of wondered this, and then I watched the credits, and I was like, oh, I was right. In the special thanks section, he thanks Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore, and because like his particular cosmology for heaven and hell and that kind of stuff, his cosmology to me felt very similar to like Neil Gaiman's The Sandman or something that Alan Moore might have come up with, and turns out I was right.
But that's the thing. I mean, Kevin Smith's love for comic books shines through, and this was one of the other things that I really loved about Kevin Smith is he was one of those examples of somebody like myself. I'm sure that, I mean, he was that guy that, if he was going to high school with several of us, I'm sure that it would be the guy that you got along with. And
Definitely.
And that's the thing is like, and it showed. It wasn't some corporate person catering to the love of comics. It was somebody who really did love it, and that was something unheard of. I mean, seeing was it Brody at the beginning talking about how he's boarding and taping. I need the Scotch tape, to tape the comics. I mean, well, I gave you the opportunity to learn how to handle them, but you said you didn't want to. And but these are things that those of us who have collected comics. I'm not a comic collector now, but I was back in those days. I mean, those are just touches that speak right to them. And that's what makes the movie special. But I wanted to go back to the thing is also when it came to the Florida trip, the other thing that he had pointed out, and I don't remember whether this was again director's cut versus theatrical cut, but he had indicated to her, I was going to propose on the Jaws ride at Universal Studios. And so it's even more pathetic in a sense what happened, and it makes you kind of feel for the guy because it's understandable why he would be jealous. I mean, you're young and you're sitting there, and she's going on this dating show, but it also shows that he doesn't have much trust.
Which that's actually really, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say he didn't really say that to her himself, if I remember correctly, in the original cut. I'm not sure if that's what you're saying. It was more like word traveled fast, as they said. like that kind of thing wasn't going to stay quiet long. Like I think it was Gwen that they found out that everyone already knew what was going to happen.
See, at the college scene, I know he had said it to her, but of course the college scene wasn't in that. And she basically said, well, this makes it even rougher on you then, or something like that. And which, yes, it would, obviously.
Yeah.
I felt bad for him because that was his, but it also shows why he was so uh, dead set on going there.
And
Mhm.
I do feel bad I feel bad for him as far as like, because I've had a engagement crash and burn also, and so it's like I know how that feels. So I definitely felt for him, and what I like about a lot of these Kevin Smith protagonists is that they have their flaws, or like one of the central flaws of a lot of Kevin Smith protagonists are that they tend to have trust issues with their
Yeah.
lady
My
friends.
friends, yeah.
They tend to have trust issues and jealousy issues, and so that's one of the things that kind of unites them. But the difference is that I don't like hate their guts in the same way that other characters in other comedies that have had problems. It's like the movie's not really aware that those characters have the problems that they have. And what I like about Kevin Smith's characters is that they start off very flawed and they often end the movie very flawed, but like it's more of like setting up a problem that the character has to work through. And it's like that to me
Mhm.
makes a lot more that makes a lot more sense. It makes them a lot more sympathetic, and it's set up clearly like this is a problem that the protagonist has to overcome, rather than saying that this is I just have a hard time with some comedies, aka Scott Pilgrim, where they kind of set up this character and you're supposed to like or relate to them, and the movie seems to be blissfully unaware of just how flawed and awful they really are. But like I do like that about his characters, especially here. But I definitely felt for him, and even Brody. Like he's the more unlikable and the more kind of self-absorbed of the two. But even he like has something about him that makes him sympathetic. I think having him get his ass kicked by Ben Affleck, not yet star Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that helps to kind of put us on his side a bit more
Mhm.
than it would otherwise if that wasn't there.
Affleck was really good at playing assholes in
Yes.
Yeah.
Kevin
Yeah,
Smith movies. I
which and
wasn't even
I said this in the
yeah.
chat. I said this in the chat that actually Ben Affleck, I think his consistently best performances tended
Or
to
assholes.
come from his work with Kevin Smith.
Kevin Smith, yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, I remember telling a colleague of mine who didn't like Affleck at all. I told him he does his best stuff either when he's either working with Kevin Smith or when he's directing himself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Most of the
like
time, he's had a couple. Like the way back was an excellent performance. He's had
Well,
a couple good, solid ones, but especially early on, you're right. Kevin Smith really got him. I think in a way some people didn't. Like I still am furious with the sheer idiocy of some of the choices he makes in Chasing Amy, but that is one of his
his what
best
his
roles, I
character
think.
makes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a couple of a
Yeah.
couple of the
Well, when
things he decides, I'm kind of like that is a boneheaded move you made there, dude. But
yeah.
I think
Well, but you
overall it is
also
one of his best
understand why
performances.
you understand why he would
Yeah,
do that though, relative to the character that was set up,
yeah,
and also the fact that his best laid plans come crashing down on him in
right,
spectacular fashion.
right.
and though it's kind of weird to say it, Kevin Smith is also a comic book nerd himself. So,
Well, yeah.
not Kevin Smith, sorry, like Ben Affleck is also a
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
comic
yeah.
book nerd himself.
I was like,
I
it's weird
mean,
to say it. Like,
yeah, sorry, but yeah, but
What world
because
are you living in?
Ben Affleck was so ecstatic about
mhm,
playing Batman,
mhm,
and I think
Yeah,
that if he had gotten the chance to actually direct his own Batman film like he
yeah,
wanted to do without WB screwing him over, I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that it
yeah.
would have been an amazing film.
Well, the
mm,
so what's interesting, mentioned the whole bit with Jeremy London there. There are a couple of actors that Kevin Smith has worked with that things haven't gone so great. I mean, the most famous
mhm,
example is Bruce Willis, which you could do hours and
Yeah.
hours on just
yeah,
that.
Oh
But
yeah.
but I'm saying like some of the lesser known ones, like he and which I guess he and Shannon Doherty in here were, they like he had, relatively nice things to say about her. Nothing like amazing, but nothing bad either. But like I know that she has a perhaps undeserved. I don't fully know, but she has a reputation for being difficult to work with, mostly from other movies and shows, but not so much from here. He had nice things to say about her, like years after the fact. So that wasn't really it, but it's just odd because she normally gets a lot of bad stuff said about her by other people. But then you have like Ben Affleck, who was one of the true blue of the View Askew troupe of actors for a good long time. And he, the two of them would sort of, snipe at each other just to like playfully in the press and stuff, because Affleck was doing a lot of big budget movies and Kevin Smith didn't really feel like he necessarily made the best choices with a lot of them. And so they sort of playfully sniped at each other. And then I guess it was like after Clerks 2 that something must have happened, because they did not speak to each other for a good while. And then it was around Jay and Silent Bob reboot that Ben Affleck heard about Kevin Smith and was like, oh, he's doing another movie. Well, I'm not busy. And so it was sort of like an olive branch.
I heard rumblings that Jennifer Garner was also drove a wedge between the two of them.
It could be.
It's definitely possible, because, which again, you talk about bros before hoes. It's like, well, the bros had to get back together.
Well, and Affleck.
That was what was so nice about, which I liked Jay and Silent Bob reboot more than the first one. And one of which is that Ben Affleck's scene was not, or like the best scene in the movie was with Ben Affleck. That was not originally in the shooting script that they were going with, because they weren't really sure they could get him. But when they got him back, I was like, oh man, it feels like, well, these two really made up. But it also was like, holy shit, Ben Affleck, that was one of the best moments of his acting career. Like, I'm not even joking. He lifted that movie way up, in terms of like sentimentality,
I also wonder, I'd read that one of the reasons, at least according to the critics' views and whatever, one of the reasons that they felt that the way back was so good was that Affleck has been dealing with alcoholism, and he drew that for the film. So that could have been part of it. But also on your thing about how he was one of the true blue actors, the original Jay and Silent Bob did have a couple of great jokes at that expense. They had there's the one part where they're meeting. I think it was his character from Chasing Amy, and they're meeting with him, and they're talking about the Blunt Man and Chronic movie, and he's like, yeah, they'll probably get Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. They put them in everything. And then when they're in Hollywood, you see all these movie posters with Affleck and all
Moonraper.
Moonraper. And then one of my favorite scenes in any Kevin Smith movie is when he and Matt Damon are filming Good Will Hunting 2.
Hunting season.
And this is just like, this is an example of what could win an Oscar for best cameo. Gus Van Sant just sitting there counting the money. Damn it, man, I said I'm busy.
I love that bit. And then I wasn't Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is actually one of my least favorite Kevin Smith films, but largely because there's some humor there that just doesn't quite work in terms of like they hold on a gag for just a little too long, or they do a little too much like obvious winking at the camera, like painfully obviously winking at the camera. But out of all of them, the one that I thought was the funniest was when it was like you do the big budget, you do the art house, the studio, do the art house picture, then you do the big budget picture, then you go back and do work for your friend because he says you owe him, and they look right at the camera.
Well, I remember that story with Kevin Smith talking about I think on one of his podcasts, he'd actually said when Ben Affleck gave him a call, like he had said, I just burst into tears.
Yeah.
Because it really did mean a lot to him.
Yeah. Well, what the version I heard was in an interview for Jay and Silent Bob reboot, that the version I heard was that it was through like a separate interview that Ben Affleck kind of put out that feeler of like, I'm not busy. And so, they hadn't talked to each other in like maybe 13 years or something like that. And then his Kevin Smith's assistant was like, just text him, see how he's doing. And so he did, and he wasn't sure if he had the right number. He's like, is this you? And Ben Affleck was like, yeah, this is me. This is your father. Who is this? And he's like, oh yeah, I know that's Ben. And he gave him a paraphrased speech from Conan the Barbarian about how there comes a time, young thief, when the gold ceases to sparkle, the this and that loses its luster, and all an old king wants to do is make pretend with his friends. And Ben Affleck texted back. He said, "I think it's so telling that you think of yourself as a king." And it was like, "Of course I'll come down and do the bit." And but that warmed my heart, because I was like, well, even though Kevin Smith, I like the guy very much, but like at his worst, his worst inclinations, like he can be a little bit high school teen girl as far as like who is feuding with who and that kind of stuff. And that has led to a little bit of bad blood here and there, specifically with Bruce Willis, who but in his defense, apparently Bruce Willis has done that to everybody.
I've
Bruce
heard
Willis has
you
had
talk
bad blood
about
with
Shannon
everybody.
Doherty. You talk about Shannon Doherty having a reputation. I think Bruce Willis, there's hardly anyone in Hollywood with a bigger chip on their shoulder, according to the reputation.
Oh, no,
I know.
Well, but it's in all his performances.
But it's more so. It's more so as a way to say that even if there is some at least mildly bad blood, that you can, make up, and you can get past it, and it can be a beautiful thing to see. But it's really cool to see all of Kevin Smith's filmography, and you see it all as a whole, and you see how the various people grew in front of the camera and behind the scenes and that kind of stuff. And you see their characters flower as they themselves, the artists as they flower. And, it's just a wonderful thing to see, because it, again, with Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Reboot both serve as somewhat of sequels to Mallrats, and like little mini cameos of various characters from Mallrats and from other stuff. And it's like, oh, so that's what that character's up to, and oh, that's where they ended up. And it's just really cool because you kind of grow up along with them, which and then we getting back to this film, interestingly, I think so. Jay and Silent Bob, we haven't really talked about them, but they are definitely continuing the characterizations that they had in the first film. But here you definitely get the sense that they, because in Clerks, you got the sense that they were interesting weirdos that just kind of hung out outside the quick stop and sold drugs, and they just kind of were lumps on a log. Basically, they were the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of that universe, and they still kind of have been that way in the larger universe. But here you get them doing their thing, but they're doing it in a different mode. Like it's a Universal film, and Kevin Smith is a big fan of like Animal House and a lot of the Blues Brothers, a lot of the Universal comedies. So they're doing their thing, but they're doing it in their Universal mainstream comedy mode. So it's definitely more mainstream mayhem here.
Yeah, here they're getting tapped by TS to sabotage Truth or Date, Brandy's Father's Teen show.
Yeah,
right.
Contract,
it's like
contract killers for hire.
What was it? It was something like, "What? Wow, you'll do it," or something like that. And Jay's something like, "Well, what else are we going to do?"
Yeah, really.
But it's kind of like this is one thing I do like about Mallrats. It's like generally I've always been amused by Jay and Silent Bob, but they do go to excess, and sometimes they go places I'd rather they not. And I think this may have been one of the areas where the movie benefited from Universal's meddling, because, actually, we talked last night when we were talking about Death Parade. We came up with Tim Burton and talked about how sometimes Burton needs someone looking over his shoulder to rein him in. Yeah. And I think Kevin Smith is like that too. He has some great instincts, and he's really witty. He can write wonderful dialogue. He's good with actors, as we just talked. Like, he's had some bad blood, but most of them love him. And he just generally seems like a really nice, chill dude you'd want to work with. But he does have a very hard time reining in his more juvenile tendencies. And this film is a good example of that. But I think Jay and Silent Bob are especially a good illustration of where he had to be reined in because he was working for a studio. And I think they're actually a little bit funnier here than they are in most of the movies.
I agree.
They really do. Yeah.
Well, that's partially why Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. That's partially why that's one of my least favorites of his, because it feels, well, it's his attempt at doing, well, so he was trying to do a stoner movie, but he wasn't a stoner in those days. But also it's more like him kind of without the guardrails and without that, with these characters that they tend to work best on the sidelines, and when they're made front and center, at least at that time, then it's just kind of them getting up to antics, and that's about it. Which is another reason why I liked Reboot more, because well, it touches on more than just them. Like, it is kind of the universe as a whole that he's trying to pay off and bring things up to date, but also the characters there that you feel like they've really grown relative to the way that they are in the first one. And it's also because, again, they work as the buffoons on the side. They are the side characters, the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern types. When they're brought to the forefront, even in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, even they, those characters have a lot more dimension than Shakespeare gave them.
I find it so funny you keep mentioning that when there's so much dialogue and Silent Bob has so little.
Oh, I know. Well, but
I know what
you know what I mean. It's like they are the side characters, the buffoons, the ones that could easily be forgotten or displaced or whatever, and yet they serve an important function. And that's another reason why I like Dogma so much, is you have like that kind of rounding out of the Shakespearean cast. You've got your noble speaking angels, and then you've got your mid-level characters, and you got your low-class bums and stuff. It's got a good mix.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were sort of like just the fools, they, as you said, the side characters. Right. But speaking from Hamlet, you also had Polonius, who was another Shakespeare staple, which could be called the wise fool. And I would almost say that's more Silent Bob's role. Like, he's sort of, because when he speaks, it's supposed to be like really profound. And sometimes it is. Not always.
Polonius was, the difference is that Polonius was in a position of regality and authority, and didn't really he didn't get branded as a fool, even though he is very buffoonish in terms of his redundancies and that kind of stuff. But but what I like, I agree with you. I think Jay and Silent Bob are served the best in this film because they're, well, here and in Dogma both, they're put in their appropriate role to where they can be on the sidelines, but they serve the main plot well, and they what they get up to feels appropriate for them, and also feels appropriate for what the story can sustain. And it's a little different here because, again, this is like mainstream comedy, more wacky mayhem, and like why would Silent Bob have the bat grapple? Why would he have that? Well, it just works in this world, And my complaint with Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back wasn't that it was kind of a broader like road movie or anything. It was more so that it didn't really have a whole lot else going for it other than just a few, like, it was kind of like a live action cartoon, but not in a way that really quite appealed to me as much as it otherwise might have. That's just me. A lot of people, that's one of their favorites, but
right. Okay, so so they go. So they're off sabotaging the game show, and their first few attempts fail. Silent Bob twice crashes in on a girl named Gwen, played by Joey Lauren Adams, while she's changing. She's also given a chance not just to be someone that Silent Bob accidentally creeps on, but she dated T. No, yeah, she did.
TS's ex-girlfriend, yeah.
She's TS's ex,
Mm-hmm.
and also
she's not playing her character from Chasing Amy. She's playing someone else.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But there is a tie into another one because they talk about an incident with a Rick Darris who we met in Clerks.
Now, also, does anybody else pick up? This is Jay and Silent Bob's parts seem more like a Warner Brothers cartoon,
definitely,
where you could see them like doing that. Like he's got his like comically his head stuck on the poster. Of course, he's in the woman's crotch on the poster.
Right, yeah.
But still, it's hilarious. It's like the coyote with the Roadrunner.
Oh, definitely saw the coyote parallel.
Yeah. What's interesting, so I did mention the live action cartoon thing with which you see some of that here, but again, it feels more like John Hughes movie-ish rather than like a Warner Brothers cartoon, which that's more Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. But what's interesting is that Kevin Smith actually the movie happened to be on TV when Harley Quinn Smith was like I want to say like 5 years old or something, happened to be on TV. And it was like, if you play that for a child with the sound down, then the movie actually plays well to a child because it was, visual. It had a lot of wacky gags and stuff. And visual comedy more so than his usual stuff, which is all dialogue. But it's like,
you just probably like seeing her old man get beat up.
Well, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun slapstick. It was.
Yeah. What's funny is that apparently that did kind of mess with her head when she was young, because there is a cameo with Scooby-Doo and the gang, the Mystery Machine Gang, and Mr. Ink in Strike Back, and she was like, Scooby, and he was like, yeah, we hang out.
At least she didn't get to see the cut scene from that one particular episode. Oh my gosh, that was where they're talking about the dog and the dog's boner, essentially, and you get to see it.
Oh Lord.
Oh dear.
Well, what's I know that he always joked about, like, she's gonna need a lot of therapy after seeing my movies, which I still don't know how many she's actually seen. Probably not a whole lot, but
probably more of them now that she's pretty much near an adult now. But
and I'll be honest, she's actually pretty damn good as an actor. She hasn't had like a major star-stealing role yet, but the stuff that she's had, I was like, she's got it.
I've seen 2 of the 3 Kevin Smith movies she had a role in, and she was good in them. She was quite good in Reboot.
Yeah, I was gonna say she was kind of the heart and soul of that movie.
I think Cruel. Right. Well, also now she's got a chance to shine outside of her father's shadow in Cruel Summer.
That's right. And she had a bit part in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as one of the Manson family.
Oh, yeah, right. I forgot about that.
But point is she's showing well for her old man, and she's starting to take off in her own right, which is good.
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about like the effects of this one or whatever. Like, Kevin Smith famously apologized for Mallrats, but he was joking. But still, he did. But there is an actual but we're talking about like the way Jay and Silent Bob are presented here. There was a very pointed barb in Chasing Amy that I always found kind of amusing, where where they're meeting with I think it's Holden, I think was the character Ben Affleck plays. Holden. And he beats up with Jay and Silent Bob, and they're talking about the comics, and Jay's like, I don't know about that stuff you guys saying Snoochie Boochies. What the fuck talks like that?
I know.
I think a lot of the catchphrases started with this movie.
Right.
Well, all of that stuff that Jay would say apparently was stuff that Jay would really say in real life, which is the crazy part. So it's not like he had to. Yeah, it's not like he had to stray too far.
Right. Anyway.
Oh, I gotta love those. But
So
yeah,
during this,
back to the movie.
but yes, during all this, during all these attempts, while Jane and Silent Bob are trying to sabotage the show,
Mm-hmm.
Brody runs into Renee with with Shannon, with Affleck's character, and finds out that they're together.
Mm-hmm.
And so he and TS conspire to distract Shannon, and so Brody can talk to Renee, and they end up having sex in the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
How do we feel? Actually, I would say, how do we?
Loving an elevator.
I gotta wonder about her taste in men.
Yes.
I mean, it's not good regardless, it seems. But
Right.
she's one of those people.
I know that I know that a lot of this was something else I found really interesting in visiting Kevin Smith's filmography all the way through. So you do see an evolution in his style of humor, some of which is for the better, some of which is for the worst. But it is interesting to see like how, especially when you get to Reboot, how they had to kind of 21st century a lot of his humor that would not have worked in 2019. Some of which they kind of use for comedic effect, like just the degree the degree of diversity of the girls that are in the girl gang or whatever this time around, and just some of the other things that kind of get updated. They do play it somewhat for comedic effect, but it is also partially to update the humor, which you then look back at stuff like Clerks and this and also Chasing Amy, which is arguably his best film, but it's got a lot about it that it hasn't aged well, and partially that's just because it's very of its time and kind of intentionally so. In the same way that like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is of its time, and we don't begrudge it for that, but it's just there's a lot of not just humor but also just concepts and stuff that you're like, yeah, that was definitely of its time, but it hasn't really aged well. And I think a lot of the humor in this film, in Chasing Amy, and in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, you're like, yeah, that kind of rings a little hollow today, especially like with a lot of that kind of boyish antic type humor. You don't really see much of these days, and I think partially is because a lot of people will now see that as kind of being in bad taste or being kind of sexist or being kind of this, that, or the other thing. And he has been accused of, or rather his writing, rather, I don't know if he himself, but like in his writing, people have noticed like degrees of like I said, men who have trust issues, who have issues with their women being like sexually liberated, and also like especially like in his comic book work, sometimes you'd have like the woman in the fridge trope of like the woman suffers so that the male protagonist can grow, that whole trope, but she's not the only one to do that. But like it's just interesting when you watch it nowadays, you're like, yeah, you couldn't do that today, or if you did it, you'd have to do it in a different way, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's one of the multiple things about this movie couldn't be done today, but I'm glad it got made. So
well, it's absolutely. Again, it's of its time, so take it in that spirit.
I was thinking back to the scene too, like when Brody and Renee are having sex in the elevator. I mean, Brody pretty much forces himself on Renee. I think this scene would not fly today. Would not.
Yeah, or even
keep in mind it's after a scene basically where she's telling him that one of the reasons why she doesn't want to be with him is that basically he's not showing any interest in that area. He just wants to sit and play video games all night. And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then they both end up going.
But no libido to attack. And then that's when he's like, yeah. But one thing that's interesting is like the language that we're hearing here is, I don't know how old that commentary that I saw is, and I think the introduction that I watched that Kevin Smith did was recorded for the Arrow release. But he repeatedly uses the phrase that this movie has aged really well, that it has aged better than most of his films. And I find that
in
very
some way,
amusing because
well, in some ways it's true.
in
Yeah.
some ways it was incredibly prescient. In some ways he kind of anticipated internet nerd culture, and that really, really, really helped his brand immensely. But in terms of some of the concepts, yeah, y'all are right. It's like it would be really hard for anyone to make this movie today. And I think the main reason that Kevin Smith is not drawn through the mud for this is because he seems like such a nice guy, like such a likable guy. No one really has the horror stories about him that some people,
Yeah.
And if he was one of those directors, yeah.
And you know what's sad, because you're right. People don't drag him through the mud. If anything, people praise him more and more over time, which is nice. And he's got a pretty loyal, not just fan following, but just people that he's worked with. They've stuck by him, which is really nice. So in other words, he's the kind of person that would inspire loyalty and inspire goodwill, and that's wonderful. Sad part is that he, as nice of a guy as he seems to be, and as like good-hearted as he seems to be, the truth of the matter, and he'll be the first to admit this, that his career, like he even said in his book, Tough Shit, which is a great book, highly recommend it. And this was all very pre Me Too, of course, but still in the wake of his own falling out with the guy, which is that he said, my career I owe to Harvey Weinstein. And it's just sad because you look at a lot of his like associations and you're like, oh, that person either fell on hard times or had a scandal, or in Harvey Weinstein was like the devil himself. And it's just sad because I'm like, I know that this guy isn't like any of those other guys. And yet, a lot of the people around in his orbit, they kind of all showed a lot of their true colors. And that's another reason why Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back sort of has a sour taste in my mouth now, because it's very much, kind of like it celebrates what Miramax was, or at least the image that it projected, which was that, oh, we're all one big happy family here, and you got to see like all the cameos from all the people, and it was like, oh, it is one big happy family, and then we pull the curtain back and we realize, oh wait, it wasn't that at all, But it's sad. That's why it made me more sad than anything to see like, oh wow, here was this flowering of the the old school studio system back for the 90s and 2000s, and then we pull it back and we're like, oh wow, it was horrible. But it's just sad because it's like, I know that Kevin Smith himself is not like these people that he's been associated with, and it's like, to a certain extent, we see a lot of guilt by association these days. But it's like, I know that this guy isn't like that, and he's in fact grown quite a bit relative to where he was and everything. But it's like, you think about that and it's like, well, geez, all of these great films in this great world that was built and all that, partially, a good chunk of that was because Harvey, took an interest in Clerks at a time when indie cinema had a stake in the box office. And it's just, again, it's sad because, again, great things came out of, and a lot of great Miramax films, and there were a ton of them that came out of this guy who was just so horrible. I mean, he had a good horse sense to him when it came to cinema, and in many reports he would bully the hell out of people to get the cuts he wanted. But it's like just sad when you think about it. But it's great to see, like, with Kevin Smith, how much he has grown and how much he has transcended his beginnings, because I mean, he could. I keep waiting for the hammer. I keep waiting for the sword of Damocles that's hanging over Tarantino's head. I'm still waiting for the sword to finally fall, because it's coming. People have been gearing up for him for a long time, some of which has been justified, others of which have been a little overblown. But I think there's probably enough skeletons in his closet that have already come out, and I don't want there to be any more, but I have been kind of theorizing that perhaps there might be more that'll come out eventually. But it's
I'm
just
kind of crazy. Yeah, but how many of those skeletons are just feet?
Yeah, that's that's the point. Is Kevin Smith isn't like that because like
Mhm.
his big strength has been that he's been such a nice kind of open person. You know, very like if anything, his problem is that he's aired too much of his dirty laundry, and that's kind of backfired in places. But also better that he be honest and rather than not, you know, than just lie and deceive and that kind of stuff.
He's always been very self-deprecating,
That
you
too.
know, from the get-go, and that endears people to people. At least, well, it always has for me. I've always been more interested in people who are not like completely full of themselves.
Oh yeah. Well, but that's what I think prevents him from, you know, potential like either backlash or God forbid, you know, cancellation or anything like that. But also because I think he's sort of found a niche for himself where he has a, you know, little pockets here and there of nerddom, and you know he is, you know who he is, to use Shakespearean terms, well, like not Silent Bob, but Kevin Smith the man. He has become Jack Falstaff. You know, he has become the lovable guy on the sidelines that people, you know, really like to hang around with, but you know, to a certain extent, people have sort of grown up past. And he himself has kind of grown up, but like that's you know, Henry V, that's his whole arc, is that he hung out with Falstaff for so long, but then he has to grow up and he has to embrace his responsibilities. A lot of people that were big Kevin Smith fans that you see on YouTube that do the big retrospectives, they're like, yeah, it was a big part of my life, but then I grew up, you know, and certain things have not aged all that well or haven't resonated with me in the way that they did then. And you can definitely see some of that, although I would argue that there are more artistic merits to him that do last beyond that stage of your life. But I do think in a lot of ways he is kind of the Jack Falstaff of the film world, of his particular era in film history. And I'm sure he would be all right with that, you know, because he's just a very easygoing kind of person. Even more so now than he was then, because he smokes weed all the time.
Right, and and so anyway, back to so Brody and Renee, they have the sex in the elevator, and after that, Brody gets assaulted by Shannon.
Yep.
For his status as a Mallrat.
Our dear Ben Affleck.
Yep. And so Brody catches up with TS and Jane Silent Bob. And he tells them he doesn't tell them that Shannon beat him up. He tells them that the Easter Bunny did. The Easter Bunny did it. Which leads to
the later scene with the Easter Bunny.
A later scene that probably one that definitely makes it must watch for me every Easter.
where they beat up the guy in the suit. And then all the kids jump in on the pile.
And good that the Easter Bunny gets the shit kicked out of him, because the Easter Bunny sucks.
Well, and also there's that earlier scene. I think it's an earlier scene with Willem, where you have the one kid come up and it's like,
they argue over the sailboat.
Schooner. It's not you dumb bastard. It's a sailboat. A sailboat is a schooner, stupid head, or whatever it is.
There is no Easter Bunny.
There is no Easter Bunny. That guy is just a guy in a suit.
All right. All right. So they go to. So finally, Brody and TS go to confront Brandy's father about using Brandy as a pawn for his show, and calls mall security on them. And Jane Silent Bob.
Well, first, Brody stink bombs him
with a chocolate pretzel.
Which is one of I have to say, like, you know, Kevin Smith has done a lot of raunchy shit. Not as raunchy as other people, I have to say. Like he's no Bob Saget, that's for sure. But out of all of the bits that were, you know, some of his raunchier bits, even I was like, oh my God, that is gross. And I have a pretty strong stomach for a lot of stuff. I think what makes it gross for me is that it is implied, which is actually very smart because it makes it even grosser.
Right.
But like because it is implied, it's like, and I think about like, you know, just how much bacteria does exist
Right.
in, well,
Oh
if
yeah.
the deeper you go anyway, the more bacteria there is. There's actually less bacteria on the human ass as than you would think, but more so when you get
Well,
when you dig deeper
Depends on
in, then
how
it's
well
like,
you
with
wipe.
Brody, you gotta wonder.
yeah, that's what I mean though. That you think about these guys who probably don't wipe all that well, and then you're like, oh my
Yeah.
god, you know this.
When you think about what his cousin Walter does to clean his,
Get the gerbil out of his ass.
but
Yeah. Want
and
a
then they
chocolate
do
covered
that.
pretzel?
Well, again, it's all implied, but they also have the added bonus of the melted chocolate.
I know.
Like,
Well, that's what makes it even better because it's implied, but it's like the mental picture in your head is like, oh my god,
right.
you know. And which, you know, thankfully Dustin's not here, else he'd be throwing up. But it's
Right.
like, you know, I can imagine that would get to a lot of people. But I'm giving praise to Kevin Smith for the fact that so much of it is implied, and the implication is what makes it even grosser. So therefore, it makes the gag hit a little better.
There is one unfortunate fallout to that, though. It's great to see what happens to Svenning. It's great. The dude's a jerk. He kind of deserves his comeuppance.
Now,
But he also uses that same hand later to shake Stan Lee's hand, and it makes you feel kind of bad for Stan Lee when you think about it.
That's one of Stan Lee's powers, is that he can't get sick from that sort of thing.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
he's
you know, like
than
in
the rest of us.
Lego Marvel superheroes, how he's the most powerful character and he's like the secret character. Well, that's one of his powers.
His
You didn't
comic
know
cover
that.
was the man, you know, the adventures of the man, you know.
Exactly.
But yeah, that was yeah, I thought about that this time around. I may have before, but I definitely did this time. I was like, I really, really, really hope Brody washed his hands good before he returned to the mall.
Yeah, if you're gonna stand in the presence of greatness, you need to. Well, it's, you know, it's like the before the Sabbath. You know, what would the Israelites do? They would undergo all the purification rituals before they could step inside the temple. So you know.
Yep. So Brody and TS go and hide out at a lesser quality mall,
right?
Where they go and get their fortune told by Ivana, who tells her topless fortune teller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the third nipple that's not real,
which I think is pepperoni. Mm-hmm. Which I think was pepperoni.
It might have been.
Yeah.
Well, what do we think? What do we think of Ivana? Other than she's got a third nipple. She's got a third nipple.
Well, she plays them well, but it's like kind of funny though. It's like Brody goes in there for one reason only, and TS is just dragged along for the ride.
And but TS gets more out of
her. He's completely suckered by her, and Brody's just kind of freaked out by the
third nipple there.
As movie collectors, all of us know about these type of flea markets, which is really what this is. It's more of a flea market, and sometimes you can get your best finds, which of course is which is really Brody's other altar, which is you never know when you can find the big one there. But that's what one of these is. I mean, we have one here in Richmond, but I've never been to it. But it is kind of cool when you see the different vendors in the different spots doing their thing.
But that scene, that's another one that, like, I don't know if one could necessarily do that scene today. It's not, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say that it's like outright sexist per se, because it's just, heterosexual guys like tits, big insight there. But it's just more so that, like, I do think you could say that particular style of humor has largely gone out of fashion, at least in the movies. but that one I think is one of the more innocent ones versus like some of the like other things that perhaps maybe wouldn't be done today, especially like with granted, you know, the bits with Silent Bob accidentally creeping on what's her face, Lauren Adams. Yeah. Like that whole bit again, it's accidental, so it's not intentional, but it's like I can already hear the social media outrage if that were to like be done today or
Now,
en masse.
one interesting question that could get twisted in the social media is I know the two of them were dating. Were they dating when those films were scenes were filmed, or
I think
before or after?
According to the Wikipedia article on Mallrats, she dated Smith after this movie.
So
yeah, they
basically
met
they
and got interested in each other, I think, because of this film.
it could be, but that would be something that, depending on how it's twisted and who's involved, like some people, they would be like, "Oh, you did that, and then you started going out." Oh, I don't know about that, but in
Yeah,
this case, it's probably not so bad. I do know that, from what I understand, the two of them kind of were hot and heavy for a very brief time, and then they've remained friends, if I understand correctly. So
that's right.
that's
Which I'm kind of
cool.
kind of amazed at that,
Yeah.
honestly. But well, partially that's so like Kevin Smith, like his discussions of that after the fact. You know, this just tells you what a different guy he is from me in that specific area, because like he, you know, talked about like different girls that he was in a relationship with at a different times in his life, and he's like, you know, even though we're not together, I never stopped loving her, never stopped loving that person or whatever. And you know, it's and just the fact that he and Joey Lauren Adams could be friends and collaborators even after the fact, like that, to me I was like, geez, you're a better man than me, because like I've not been able to do that with the people that, you know, that I have been in a relationship with. I haven't been able to, you know, get past that. You know, it's always been a matter of like, just get rid of that person from my life so that the pain can go away, or, you know, if not outright, just hatred and hostility. But, you know, that's my problem.
Yeah. And not to mention, like, just the fact that, you know, he got married. Jennifer Smallbach, I guess he married when they were doing
It was
Jane
the
Silent
press.
Bob, or after, or
It was the press tour for Dogma.
press tour for
Actually,
Dogma.
Actually, no, sorry. Chasing Amy, and then also leading into Dogma, because yeah, they were on the press junket. Kevin Smith was brought on to answer some questions to the press on behalf of Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, because the rumors were going around in '97 that, oh, they didn't really write Good Will Hunting. Kevin Smith really did. And so Harvey Weinstein kind of dispatched Kevin Smith to talk to the press to be like, no, that didn't happen, because they couldn't have Ben and Matt do that, because it would come off as like self-defensive and stuff. So they had him do it, and they had USA Today reporter go up to his room to interview him, and who should it be but Jennifer Schwalbach, who Kevin Smith on. And I mentioned Dogma because they were actually in rehearsals for Dogma at the time. It was post Chasing Amy, but he was in rehearsals for quite a while to get that movie made. But like, he honestly thought that Chris Rock had sent a hooker up to his hotel room because he was stunned by how beautiful Jennifer Schwalbach
See, there's
was.
one. I've not heard anything negative at all about his interaction. Maybe when I look more into Dogma or some of the others, but we were talking about the people he's worked with. I wonder if he'll do. Well, he's done. Okay, he has done another one or two with Chris Rock. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
but
like, back.
Yeah, but like some of the others, like Salma Hayek and Michael Rooker and some of them, I kind of wonder if they'll be back around eventually.
I hope
kind of cool.
That's another reason why I like Dogma so much, is that there were a lot of very notable one-off collaborations that you're like, well, why couldn't they get back together? Because they did great.
It's so sad that we won't get to see another one with Alan Rickman. That's too bad.
he was like
or
he
George
really was.
Carlin for that matter.
Oh, I know. Which his crowning glory, insofar as Kevin Smith goes, is actually in Jersey Girl, and that's one of the reasons why I really like Jersey Girl, because George Carlin really did a great job in that film. And he did a good job in Kevin Smith films in general, but there are a lot of great one-offs there, and you do kind of wonder, because there are some good one-offs in Mallrats as well, but it's like, is it because something went down, or is it just because the timing didn't work out or whatever? Because the lead of Dogma, they actually didn't really get along very well.
Linda Fiorentino, I believe.
Yeah, they did not get along very well.
Oh, I'm wondering how much of that was because of Harvey Weinstein.
It's possible, but
Weinstein is
and actually the
co-star had a reputation of bad mouthing actresses.
True.
That wouldn't sleep with him. So
yeah, well, that's the other thing.
It's possible. I know that a lot of the conflicts that he and that. Well, I know that the conflicts that she and Kevin had, at least the ones that were mentioned, were kind of more of the fact that she was exhausted by and pissed off at the fact that the other actors kind of came and went from the film because they were taking SAG scale and they were busy with other projects, and they kind of had to fit them in where they could, whereas she had to be in like so much of the movie because she was the protagonist, and she was sort of pissed about that. And there could have been other things, but like that's what I knew about. Which, funny part about Dogma, though, I listened to the commentary track, and the commentary track is heavily censored. Like as far as like they not for language and stuff, but for like, I think they couldn't mention like Miramax. I think because of the copyright situation mostly, but I was like, wow, I've never heard of a commentary track being this heavily censored, but holy crap.
Well, I mean, again, I know I've seen plenty times where a director or producer can really screw with the relationships, spread lies, and dissent amongst. I mean, I've had several friends who've had that happen with a director, where they put people against each other. So I can definitely see where that could happen, especially with Weinstein.
Which I'm not ruling it out whatsoever. I hadn't heard anything concrete as far as she was concerned, but I wouldn't put it past our boy Harvey.
He is one heck of a white rabbit.
Oh boy! Nowadays, I refer to him as feminist icon Harvey Weinstein.
All right, so let's get. All right, so we're almost done. We're almost done here. So Brody and TS go back to the mall, where Brody has where Stan Lee strikes up a conversation with Brody.
Best scene in the movie.
Yep. Yeah. What do we all think about this scene?
It's pretty good. It's definitely the most extended Stan Lee role that I'm aware of, and again, he had trouble remembering his lines, but he did a really good job of playing it off. Like I read in the commentary, and I heard on the commentary, I read in the trivia that you'll often see him looking at the cue cards, but you don't really see it unless you're looking for it. He does a good job playing it off as being lost in thought, or stuff like that. And he actually did a good job, I think. And of course, Brody is just like a total fanboy, just having have a heart attack trying to ask all these questions.
Yeah, I mean, he's 1 second away from doing a Wayne's World, and like, we're not worthy.
Exactly.
Seriously.
I mean, I love the end part where he comes in there and you realize he's just been like put up to it by the other guy.
Right.
Yeah,
and
I
love his line where he's like, something like he's a good kid or whatever, but then he's like, but I think he needs him help. Yes, an obsession with.
I'm not gonna lie. So after Star Wars Rogue One came out, I actually had kind of a Brody moment watching that movie.
Really?
Where I was like, because I was, we saw Darth Vader taking a bath, and I'm like, So does Darth Vader still have his junk and is it functional?
That kind of a Brody moment. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
I admit I can understand having those questions because, well, frankly, I've had them at times. But it seems like that's 90% of what Brody thinks about. And it is 90% of what he asks Stan Lee about. It's like if I met an icon like that, I would temper those questions with a few not so.
Well, it's funny because that was that was 1 year after Forrest Gump and a couple years after the Chris Farley show sketch,
Right.
Recurring sketches on SNL, where the whole gag of both of those things was that you're faced with famous people, but even beyond famous people, like legends, like say Paul McCartney with Chris Farley show.
Farley.
Or like Forrest Gump, of course, the gag is meeting
With
three
Kennedy.
presidents and all that stuff,
Right.
and all the mundane stuff that you would think to say instead of saying something more profound or whatever. That's the gag. But like, I do think the kryptonite condom bit is one of the more memorable Brody exchanges.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I had my Brody moment of the Stan Lee variety back in 2015 when Stan Lee came to the Heroes Convention and I paid top dollar to get my picture taken, and it was like 10 seconds, but it felt like people who've had UFO encounters, how they describe having lost time. That's kind of how it felt. I remember my brain felt kind of fuzzy afterwards because I was on such cloud nine. I was like, I don't want to make a fool of myself, but I want to do my thing and not bother him and stuff. But it really, really felt like a surreal moment, and I still have the picture framed, and I was like, I'll always hold on to this for the rest of my life. And he's no longer here with us, but he lived to be like 95 or something. So like he lived a good full life, and he left behind such a legacy. But I was gonna say, I was like, could I do an autograph of his, or could I take my picture with him? And I was like, I'm gonna do that because that's a physical artifact of the fact that I stood in his presence, in the presence of true greatness, and I did, and it really did feel like a UFO encounter because I lost time and my brain was scrambled, but it was worth it.
Right. So Brody and TS sneak onto Truth or Date as contestants. Jay and Silent Bob beat a bunch of snacks to two of the contestants. A bunch of snacks and while they're doing this, they tap a teenage girl, Trisha, who had sex with Shannon and had taped it.
They also something that definitely would not pass these days.
I was gonna say that. I'm glad you said that, because like that, when I was watching it, I was like, oh man, you could not do this today at all. I mean, I
think we need to backtrack a little bit to Trisha. Like, what do we think of her?
I mean,
she's statutory rape essentially, as she's having all these guys basically commit statutory rape.
Which now here's the interesting thing though, is like you could make a film where that is the premise of like a precocious high school girl who undergoes this social experiment type thing, and then eventually realizes, oh wait, I can use this as blackmail, and then she
she's got some pretty good blackmail built up.
But like that could be its own dark comedy, like a satirical dark comedy. I think that'd make a damn good movie. But like,
she's got that of course is everything. I mean, that's like, oh god.
And that of course is exactly the idea Brody gets. He basically says, "Hey, Silent Bob, jury rigged something here. Hey, Trisha, I like that. Take TS's car, but I don't have a license." It's just like he sends her to go get the tape. But meanwhile, we meet, like you said, the two kind of worm their way onto the show by Jay toking the other two under the table. But there's still the third contestant,
Gil Hicks.
Gil, Gil Hicks, who is Dante's cousin. So another Clerks tie-in, and played by Brian O'Halloran, who is in basically all of the Kevin Smith, or most of the Kevin Smith.
The Hicks family.
Yeah, the extended Hicks family, because there's another Hicks that plays the news reporter who gets killed in Dogma.
Right. And actually, I never really quite said this, but one of the reasons Mallrats is not at the top of my list is that there are a lot of similarities between T.S. and Dante and Brody and Randall.
Yeah.
And so there's an argument that can be made. This kind of was Clerks Light with a bigger budget.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of the feeling that, hey, I can play in the same pool with more money and hopefully get a bigger bang for the buck. I do think overall, and I kind of disagree, I kind of like Dante more than TS, but I kind of like Brody probably more than Randall, because Randall's more of just an unmitigated ass.
Asshole.
I mean, one of the reasons why these two were recommended to me by my coworkers was, if you've worked in retail, Clerks in particular, but Mallrats too, they're kind of anthemic to people who've worked in
retail. Yes,
and that's fair enough. I think that I agree that they're in a very similar, like, white male bromance kind of mode. Like, they're in that same mode, except that I do think they are different characters and different pairings, because like our protagonists, TS and Dante, they are hung up over a girl, admittedly. I think TS is perhaps a bit more overtly romantic, shall we say, and I would wonder if the name TS is not an indication of that, because it's like, exactly. I picked that up immediately. I was like, this guy is clearly a bit more of a classical romantic rather than like, and Dante's got that too. I mean, he's also got a literary name. But he's
out proposing to his girlfriend on the Jaws ride.
Exactly. And I think that TS is perhaps a little bit more of like a classical romantic in a way that Dante wishes he could be. But again, neither of them are that far apart from each other in that department. But
TS is a little more sure of what he wants. I will give him that, because Dante is kind of
very.
Dante's really wishy-washy.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the. They are whiny, but
you could almost hear TS saying, "I'm not even supposed to be here today." I don't think he ever does, but you could almost hear him.
I was supposed to be in Florida today.
Anyway, I think that's what I liked. Go ahead.
I was like, we're going a little over time here. Just want to wrap, try to get things wrapped up.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so they go on the game show. So they are able to. So they play the tape, and Shannon after screwing around with the game.
Yeah, you got to mention Brody basically making a mockery of the host and his attempts to run the show.
That was awesome.
They are able to play the tape, and Shannon gets arrested. Both Shannon and Brandy's father both get arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon for statutory rape, and Brandy and Mr. Svenning for indecent, for explicit footage. Brody and TS both win back their girlfriends, and we see what happens to all the characters following that day's events. Brody introduces Renee to his mother and hosts the Tonight Show. TS and Brandy get married on the Jaws ride.
Shannon makes some new friends in jail.
Trisha becomes a best-selling author.
Yes.
William finally sees the sailboat. And
with LaFours, who we barely mentioned, but LaFours is basically her road manager, I guess.
Her bodyguard.
Yeah.
Anyway, so everybody has their happy. Well, some have their happy endings. I guess we'll go around to ask, what everyone's favorite part, any favorites. Brandon.
The ending there with Jay and Silent Bob
Yeah.
that alludes to what will happen with Strike Back. Yeah.
All right, so let's go to favorites. Brandon.
I actually really like the what do they call it? The love connection scene. I find that whole scene hilarious. Just in of itself.
So the truth or date, the whole
Yeah.
game. Yep.
Though
All right.
also I did like the opening scene that was utilized for the what do they call it? For that director's cut. I did think that was pretty cool.
All right, and Jake, what about you? What was your favorites?
It's hard to say because there's a lot of little ones. We barely touched on the actual attempts of Jay and Silent Bob to sabotage the stage show. And their sort of antagonism with LaFour's. Those scenes for the most part were pretty great. The little with the love, the date sequence, there's a couple good parts. There's like the part where they ask Brody what sounds would he make, and he starts doing all this weird stuff, and he's like, well, I wouldn't say that on, I don't feel right saying that, after that big buildup, you know what I mean? Like, and then of course, I always love when Silent Bob speaks. And in this one, I think it was with the adventure, excitement. A Jedi craves not these things.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So you have these moments, but then that kick-ass opening sequence with the comics was also just
yes,
love it.
Yeah. It's just a great opening sequence, and the end sequence especially where Willem finally saw the sailboat and he just looks at the camera with this yeah.
All right.
It's good times.
What about you, Dane? Favorites?
Well, I mean, Stanley's got to take the number one spot. I mean, that's kind of a given. But besides that, I think the bit with the kryptonite condom stuck out to me. Because the deeper you go into...
What a choice of wording.
What? Oh, the bit with, yeah. But the more that you dive into comic book lore, the more that your nerd brain does kind of, wonder those kinds of things. So that it was similar to the Death Star contractor bit in the Clerks,
right.
Except I think the kryptonite condom's funnier. Just because, I mean, the contractor bit for the Death Star, it's like, given how huge the Empire is, it's like, the more you think about it, it's like, yeah, they probably would have to use independent contractors to do a lot of their construction projects and stuff. So that, and there are innocents that suffer even amongst like evil empires in history and stuff,
right?
In real life. But it's like that part kind of is self-evidently true. Whereas the kryptonite condom, that's kind of unique to Superman. And I haven't seen. Go ahead.
I was going to say to quote George Carlin, these are the thoughts that kept me out of the really good
schools. Yes, I know. Which, to jump quickly on what you said with Silent Bob, whenever he speaks, it's usually some really big profundity or it's some great punchline or whatever, like, No Ticket in Dogma, or like he does the Glengarry Glen Ross speech in Reboot.
Or the Chasing Amy speech.
Yeah, that's of course, that's probably his crowning glory as far as like drama goes. My favorite in terms of comedy for when Silent Bob speaks is, and I'm not the biggest fan of Clerks 2, even though I think it's a solid movie. I'm just like Kevin Smith, that's his favorite movie he's ever done. And I wouldn't go that far, but my favorite comedic Silent Bob speaks moment is in that film where you think he's going to provide the big profundity like he did in the first one. And he's like, I got nothing.
Yeah.
It was like, that was great. Great anti-climax there.
All right, and for me, I would say favorites. I would probably say the Stan Lee scene is definitely a big for me. A big one.
How can it not be that scene? Let's just be real.
It's a classic.
It's Stan Lee. Come on.
And also, yeah, that for me, that I would say that, and I also agree the game, the whole truth or dates, the whole third act with the truth or date. Just because mainly because of Brody. All right, and that's pretty much what I got. Well, I'm sure there's plenty. I mean, there's like you were saying, Jake. There's plenty of good great little moments. But if I had to pick like the big ones, so, like those would be it. All right, and I think that's
cool.
All right, and I think that's all. That's Mallrats.
You ready to roll on over to another rollicking comedy?
or rollicking space horror war film.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Well, with that being said, I hope you've enjoyed it, and you will follow us on to Inside Movies Galore, where we will be discussing aliens. And thank you all for listening, and good night.
Good night, all.
Snoochie.